You sit on an overturned wooden crate beside your canvas tent as the long Nevada day finally begins to let go of the land. The sun, now just a soft white disk slipping behind the low brown mountains to the west, pulls the heat of the afternoon with it, leaving the air to cool in slow invisible currents that move across the desert floor like a gentle exhalation. Your body feels heavy and still, the way a stone feels heavy and still after it has been set down, and you do not move because there is no reason to move. The crate beneath you has the worn smoothness of many sittings, its edges rounded by the friction of canvas trousers and the passage of wagons over rutted dirt roads, and it supports you without complaint, creaking once when you first settled onto it, and now silent. Your hands rest palm up on your knees, the fingers slightly curled, holding the memory of the shovel's smooth handle, even though the shovel itself leans against a creosote bush several paces away. That memory is not a thought, but a physical echo, a residual shaping of the muscles that have been gripping ash wood since the first grey light of morning. The skin on your palms feels thick and warm, the calluses along the base of each finger, raised and slightly shiny from the friction of thousands of shovelfuls of gravel and broken shale, and in the cooling air, these calluses seem to pulse with a slow, muted heat of their own. You do not look at them because you already know them, having watched them form over weeks and months, a gradual hardening that has turned your hands into reliable tools. Before you, arranged in a small circle of black volcanic stones you gathered from the surrounding desert weeks ago, waits a neat pile of dry twigs and crushed sagebrush, the kindling for a fire that you have not yet lit. The stones sit steady and patient, having done nothing all day but hold their shape under the sun, and now in the fading light they release a faint warmth absorbed from the afternoon, a warmth you can feel when you lean forward just enough to bring your face nearer to the ring. The twigs are brittle and grey, some no thicker than a pencil, others as slender as a matchstick, and you broke them over your knee this morning before the work began, a small preparatory act that now feels like it happened to a different person. The sagebrush leaves are dry and curling, silver green on one side and pale tan on the other, and they fill the space between the twigs like crumpled paper waiting for a spark. The whole camp around you rests on a flat shelf of ground above the newly graded railroad bed, a long bench of compacted earth and gravel that you and the other men have been carving into the basin for months. The canvas of your tent, a pale cream color when it was new but now faded to the hue of dusty sand, hangs slack over its wooden frame. The ropes that guy it to iron stakes in the ground gone loose from the day's dry heat. A slight wrinkle runs diagonally across the front panel, a permanent crease from being folded and packed and unfolded too many times, and in the dying light it looks like a gentle scar earned honestly. Behind the tent, the land falls away in a gentle slope, scattered with sagebrush and rabbit brush, and the occasional dark green spike of a Joshua tree, and beyond that slope stretches the wide, open floor of the basin, its surface a patchwork of pale dust and black rock and subtle shadows that lengthen toward the east as the sun continues its descent. The light at this hour has no harsh edges. It moves through shades of pale orange and dusty blue that bleed into each other so slowly you cannot mark the moment when one color becomes another, only that the orange which was in the western sky a while ago has now softened to a wash of salmon, and the blue overhead is deepening from the color of a robin's egg to the color of slate. The sagebrush near your tent catches the last low rays, each tiny leaf outlined for a second in a rim of gold, and then the light slides off and leaves the bush to its natural muted grey. A small lizard, pale as sand and no longer than your thumb, scuttles across a nearby rock, pauses to absorb the last warmth the stone will give tonight, and then vanishes into a crevice without making a sound. You breathe in slowly, and the air that enters your nose carries a layered catalogue of smells, all of them known and none of them surprising. The most immediate is the dry, clean scent of the desert itself, a smell that has no single source but seems to rise from the very ground, the accumulated aroma of sun-baked earth and ancient dust, and the resinous oils of 1,000 creosote bushes. Layered over that is the sharper, more specific smell of crushed rock, the fine grey powder that has coated your clothes and hair since the first swing of the pickaxe this morning, and that now works its way into every breath as a faint mineral dryness at the back of your throat. And beneath both of those, still clinging to the fibers of your cotton shirt and the weave of your canvas trousers, is the metallic tang of blasting powder. A smell like the ghost of a thunderstorm, acrid and thin and utterly distinctive. You do not mind these smells, having long since stopped noticing them as separate things. They have blended into the single overall scent of the work, and the work is what brought you here. From the direction of the railroad cut half a mile to the east, no sound reaches you now. The cut has been silent since the foreman blew his whistle to mark the end of the shift. A single long note that drifted across the basin and faded into the sagebrush. And after that whistle, the men laid down their tools and began the slow walk back to camp, their boots scraping on gravel and their voices low with the tired satisfaction of a day completed. The dust those boots raised still hangs in the air above the grade, a fine suspended cloud that the evening breeze has not yet stirred, and you watched it for a while after you sat down, that motionless curtain of particles glowing faintly in the horizontal light. Even the settling of that dust happens in a quiet too soft to be heard, each microscopic grain descending at its own unhurried pace, until it touches the surface of a sage leaf or a tent roof or a boot toe with a silence absolute and complete. You shift your weight on the crate by a fraction of an inch, not because you are uncomfortable, but because your body asks for a small adjustment, and you comply without thinking. The canvas of your trousers whispers against the wood, a dry sound like a hand brushing across a page of old paper, and then you are still again. Your neck, where the day's sun touched it most directly, feels tight and slightly warm, the skin there having absorbed hours of light and now releasing that stored heat into the cooling air with a sensation that is almost a tingle. You roll your head once, very gently, and the small muscles along the sides of your neck loosen by a degree too small to measure, but large enough to notice. The sky continues its slow transformation, and you watch it without watching it, your eyes resting on the horizon, while your attention drifts somewhere else entirely. A thin band of clouds has appeared in the north. Long streaks of vapor tinted a pale rose at their leading edges and fading to grey at their tails, and they move so slowly that they seem painted onto the dome of the sky. A bird passes across them, a dark silhouette against that rose-grey backdrop, its wings beating with a steady rhythm that carries it from one side of your vision to the other before it diminishes into a dot and vanishes. You do not know what kind of bird it is, and you do not wonder. It was simply a shape moving through the light, and now it is gone. Your thoughts, such as they are, have slowed to the pace of the cooling earth, the urgency of the day, the count of shovelfuls, the weight of each stone, the careful placement of rails, the shouted instructions that have to be heard over the clang of metal on metal, has drained away, leaving behind a quiet interior space that asks nothing of you. You might recall, in a fuzzy, sideways manner, the weight of the rock bar in your hands as you pried a large slab of granite free from the cut wall this morning, the way the iron bar vibrated with the impact of the sledge, the sudden give when the slab broke loose and tumbled into the rubble. But these images pass through your mind without generating any emotion, like driftwood floating on a very slow river, and you do not hold on to them. The small pile of kindling inside the stone ring has not moved, of course, because there is no wind to stir it. The air is so still that the slenderest twig at the top of the pile remains perfectly upright, its tip pointing toward the darkening sky as if it were a tiny flagpole. A single dry sage leaf, detached from its stem by the crackling heat of the afternoon, has come to rest on a flat stone just outside the ring, and it too does not move, even when you lean over and exhale near it to test the stillness. Your breath, warmer than the surrounding air, forms a brief cloud that dissipates in less than a heartbeat, and the leaf does not even quiver. That is how still the evening is, still enough that you can hear your own heartbeat if you listen for it, a soft and regular thump somewhere deep in your chest that keeps time with nothing in particular. You turn your attention, with the same lack of urgency, to the objects arrayed around your small campsite. Near the tent opening, where the canvas is tied back with a length of cotton cord, sits the wooden water cask that has traveled with you all the way from the supply depot in Utah. Its staves are dark with moisture that seeps through the grain very slowly, and the iron hoops that bind it have rusted to a deep orange-brown. Beside the cask rests your tin kettle, blackened from many fires, a dent on one side from the time a wagon wheel bumped it during a river crossing. Your enamel mug, chipped at the rim, sits upside down on a flat rock to keep the dust out. The shovel, as mentioned, leans against the creosote bush, and beside it a pickaxe with a handle worn smooth by the same calluses that shape your palms. All of these things are quiet, stationary, waiting for tomorrow. You notice, without any sense of alarm or interest, that the temperature has dropped enough, that the skin on your forearms, where your sleeves are rolled up, has begun to prickle into the faintest suggestion of goose flesh. It is not cold. The desert in summer does not know cold. But the contrast between the day's stored heat and the evening's gentle cool is enough to wake the small hairs on your arms into a standing position. You consider for a moment. In that slow way, one considers things when there is no hurry, whether to unroll your sleeves or to light the fire. The fire would be easy, a lucifer match struck on the rough paper and touched to the dry sage, but you are not yet ready for that small action. You want instead to sit here a while longer in this intermediate state, this gap between the doing and the done, this quiet bridge from the day to the night. The last direct light of the sun has now left the basin entirely, the mountains to the west having swallowed it completely, and what remains is the indirect glow of the sky itself, a dome of deep blue with a band of pale turquoise at the horizon's rim. The colors are not dramatic or sudden. They change with the patience of water smoothing a stone imperceptibly and perpetually. The sagebrush that a moment ago held a golden edge now appears uniformly gray, its leaves blending into the general duskiness of the ground. The distant mountains, which all day were a crisp brown silhouette, have softened into a hazy blue-gray, their outlines blurring until you cannot tell where mountain ends and sky begins. Even the canvas of your tent has lost its warm sandy tone and taken on the cool grey of twilight, so that it seems to recede slightly from your vision, becoming less substantial, more like a thought of a tent than a tent itself. The first star will come soon, you know, because you have watched this same sky from this same crate on many evenings before. A ritual so established it requires no planning or intention. You do not search for that first star yet, keeping your gaze instead on the middle distance where the railroad grade cuts a straight line across the basin floor. A line that will someday carry iron rails and steam engines all the way to the Pacific, but which tonight is only a stripe of slightly disturbed earth visible as a band of lighter grey in the gathering dark. The work of that line is a work in progress, and tomorrow you will return to it with the same shovel and the same hands. But tonight it is simply a shape in the landscape, a mark made by human effort and now resting along with the humans who made it. A small breath of wind does finally stir, so light it is more a suggestion of movement than actual movement. And with it comes a faint sound you have not heard since mid-morning, the distant papery rustle of sagebrush leaves brushing against each other. The sound rises and falls once, and then is gone, leaving the stillness even deeper than before. You feel that tiny breeze pass across your forehead, cool and dry, and the sensation is so pleasant and so fleeting that you close your eyes for a moment, not because you are tired enough to sleep, but because you want to experience that coolness without any visual distraction. Behind your eyelids, the day's last light appears as a soft reddish glow, the accumulated light stored in your retinas slowly fading, and you listen to the deep quiet that encircles the camp. A quiet made of absence. No hammers, no shovels, no voices, no blasting charges. Only the sound of your own slow breathing and the very distant, almost imagined, hum of the earth itself. When you open your eyes again, the world has moved further into dusk. The blue overhead now dark enough that you could mistake it for the deep water of a lake if you did not know better. The kindling in the stone ring has melted into a shapeless dark mass, the individual twigs no longer distinguishable from one another. The flat stone where you placed the mug is now a patch of grey among other patches of grey. And yet there is no urgency to light the fire, even now. You are content to sit and feel the air flow into your lungs and out again, to let the warmth of your body slowly equalize with the coolness of the evening, a process that will take all night and will not be complete until just before dawn. The crate holds you, the ground holds the crate, the mountains hold the sky, and you are a small part of all of it, motionless and quiet, watching the last pale light drain from the horizon as the desert breathes around you. Your body settles into the stillness of the evening with the slow spreading heaviness of water sinking into dry ground, and each part of you in turn makes its tiredness known. The sensation begins in your shoulders, which have been lifting and swinging and dropping all day from the first grey hint of dawn until the foreman's whistle released you. And now they settle into a deep, diffuse ache that is not sharp or burning, but simply present, a low, steady hum of effort remembered. This ache does not demand anything from you, does not ask to be rubbed or stretched or soaked. It simply reports itself. A quiet bulletin from the muscles that have done their work and now need nothing more than the absence of motion. You let it be there, and the letting itself becomes a kind of rest. From your shoulders the awareness drifts downward, tracing the path of the day's exertions, and you feel the corresponding tiredness in your upper arms, where the biceps have been tensed around the shovel handle in a grip that never fully loosened. That grip was not fierce, not desperate, but steady and consistent, the sort of holding that a branch has on a tree trunk, firm without being rigid, enduring without being strained. Now those muscles, released at last, have gone soft and warm, and they lie against the bone with the slack weight of a folded blanket. You notice, without moving to confirm it, that your forearms feel similarly emptied of tension, the long cords that run from elbow to wrist, having spent the day controlling the angle of the shovel blade, are now resting in a state of complete indifference. Your hands, which you left palm up on your knees a while ago, have grown cool on the backs where the evening air touches them, and remain warm on the palms where the day's friction still glows faintly. The shovel itself is not in your hands now, but the memory of its presence remains so vividly that your fingers curl slightly when you think about it, forming around a shape that is not there. That shape, an ash handle worn to a particular smoothness, has imprinted itself onto your grip so thoroughly that you could pick it out from a dozen other handles in the dark, simply by the way it fits the curves of your calluses. The shovel leans against a creosote bush perhaps 10 paces from where you sit, and you can see it from here if you turn your head just a little. A dark vertical line against the grey-green foliage, the blade catching the last pale light of the sky and holding it as a faint silvery gleam. The blade, originally black iron when it came from the supply depot months ago, has been polished by the endless friction of sand and gravel and stone into a bright crescent of bare metal, and that crescent shines now in the twilight like a small moon risen early from the earth. Your eyes rest on that gleam for a long, unhurried moment, while your mind drifts back through the hours of the day, not reconstructing events in order, but simply letting images surface and fade like bubbles rising through water. You see, as if from a great distance, the first swing of the shovel this morning, the way you pushed the blade into the loose pile of broken rock that the blasting crew had left behind, the slight resistance as the metal edge found the spaces between stones, the weight of the loaded blade as you lifted it and turned and flung the contents into the waiting handcart. Each of those motions was a complete small cycle, a loop of effort that began with a bend of the knees and ended with a straightening of the back and a pause of perhaps half a second before the next cycle began. And those cycles repeated themselves so many times over so many hours that they ceased to be individual actions and became a single continuous flow, a river of movement that carried you from sunrise to sunset without once breaking its surface. The shovel blade made a particular sound each time it entered the pile of rubble, a sound you have heard so often that it has become a kind of music you no longer consciously hear. It was a gritty, scraping note, the noise of steel sliding against shattered granite and loose shale, and it varied according to the composition of the pile. A fine gravel produced a soft hiss, a heap of larger stones produced a series of small clinks, and the occasional patch of pure sand produced almost no sound at all, just a faint sigh as the blade sank in. You remember, in the same drifting way, the weight of a fully loaded shovel, the way the handle pressed down into your left hand while your right hand gripped near the top to guide the swing. That weight was not extreme, a dozen pounds perhaps, but multiplied by the thousands of repetitions it became a cumulative burden that your body learned to manage without complaint, distributing the load across shoulders and back and legs in an invisible choreography of compensation. The handle of the shovel, that ashwood you know so well, began the day cool and smooth from the night air. And you recall how it felt when you first picked it up in the grey dawn. Your hands still stiff from sleep, the grain of the wood slightly rough against the uncalloused parts of your fingers. By mid-morning the sun had warmed it, and the handle absorbed that warmth and held it, so that touching it was like touching a living thing, a wooden limb that had taken on the temperature of the day. By afternoon, the sweat from your palms had darkened the wood near the grip, a stripe of moisture that worked its way into the grain and then dried in stripes as the sun baked it, leaving a patina of use that deepened with every passing hour. Now, leaning against the creosote bush in the cool of the evening, that handle is cooling as well, releasing its stored heat into the desert air at the same slow pace that your own body releases its heat. The two of you, man and tool, settling into the night together. You notice that the achiness in your lower back, which you had not consciously registered until now, has eased somewhat from the simple act of sitting still. During the work, it was a constant companion, a dull presence at the base of your spine that flared slightly each time you twisted to fling a shovelful into the cart, then subsided into a background hum during the brief intervals when you straightened up and wiped your forehead with the back of your hand. Now that you have been sitting for some time, that spinal ache has softened into a general warmth, as if the muscles have finally understood that the work is over and have begun the slow process of unknotting themselves. You lean back very slightly, letting the crate take a little more of your weight, and the change in angle distributes the pressure in a new way that feels, for a moment, as luxurious as any feather bed. Your legs, too, have earned their rest, though they demand it less loudly than your upper body. All day they have been your foundation, planted in the shifting gravel of the rail bed, absorbing the shock of each shovelful and providing the stable base from which your arms and back could work. The large muscles of your thighs, the quadriceps and hamstrings, have been engaged in a constant isometric holding, a steady brace that never quite relaxed even when you shifted your stance. Now those muscles have let go of their vigilance, and they spread against the wooden crate with the passive weight of sandbags, heavy and worn and completely at ease. Your feet inside your thick leather boots feel swollen in the way that feet do after a day of standing, the blood having pooled there due to the simple pull of gravity. And you know without looking that your socks will have deep indentations around the ankles where the boot tops pressed. That knowledge is not a complaint, merely an observation. A small fact, among many small facts that together make up the texture of the day's end. The crate you sit on has its own history of bearing weight, and you can feel the slight concavity in the wood where countless sittings have compressed the fibers. The surface was once flat and rough, cut from a soft pine plank at some mill far away, planed to a uniform thickness, nailed into a box that carried supplies across the plains and over the mountains before being emptied and repurposed as camp furniture. Now the center of the top slat has been polished by the friction of canvas trousers to a smooth, almost waxy finish, while the edges remain sharp and splintery, a contrast that you navigate without thinking by sitting slightly forward so that your weight falls on the worn middle. The crate does not wobble, because the ground beneath it is hard and dry, and has been tamped down by the soles of your boots over many evenings, creating a small level platform exactly the right size. That you did not intentionally create this platform, that it emerged simply from the habit of placing the crate in the same spot every night, is a thought that passes through your mind without leaving a trace. The fading light continues its slow retreat, and the silvery gleam of the shovel blade dims by degrees, until it is no longer a bright crescent, but a soft grey shape barely distinguishable from the leaves around it. As that visual detail recedes, your other senses come forward, and you become more aware of the sounds that make up the evening's quiet. From the other tents, scattered along the shelf of ground, come the same muted domestic noises you hear every night. The clink of a tin cup against a kettle, the low murmur of a conversation too far away to pass into words, the occasional cough or the scrape of a boot heel on a stone. A man named Callahan, whose tent is situated 2 spots to your left, is humming a tune so fragmentary and soft that you cannot identify it, the melody rising for a few notes and then trailing off, only to resume a minute later with a different fragment. This humming is so familiar to you now that its absence would be more noticeable than its presence, and you let it drift through your awareness like the scent of distant sage, present but not requiring attention. A small insect, a cricket perhaps, or some desert relative, has begun its nightly rhythm somewhere near the creosote bush. Its chirp, a steady pulse that seems to be measuring the darkness rather than the time. The chirp comes at regular intervals, a quick, bright sound that hangs in the still air for a fraction of a second before dissolving, and between each chirp there is a silence so complete that the chirp itself feels almost like a small stone dropped into a pond. A brief disturbance that makes the surrounding quiet visible by contrast. You listen to this cricket without listening, your attention not fixed on it, but resting nearby, and the sound becomes part of the general texture of the evening, no more demanding than the feel of the cooling air on your skin. Your thoughts return, as they often do during these twilight pauses, to the specific quality of the work itself, not as a series of events, but as a physical memory stored in your tissues. There was a rhythm to the shoveling that your body found and held on to, a rhythm that was not dictated by any formal schedule, but emerged naturally from the interaction between your muscles and the material. That rhythm had a tempo somewhere between a walking pace and a heartbeat, and once you settled into it, the hours passed without friction, the motion becoming so automatic that your conscious mind could drift away while your body continued its task. You remember moments during the afternoon when you looked up and were surprised by the position of the sun, whole stretches of time having elapsed without any awareness of their passing, dissolved into the simple repetition of bend and lift, and swing, and dump, and straighten, and repeat. During those stretches the world narrowed to a small circle of immediate perception. The texture of the gravel under your boots, the weight of the loaded shovel, the arc of the swing, the rattle of stone against the metal sides of the handcart. Outside that circle nothing existed. Not the distant mountains or the wide sky or the other men working alongside you, just the task and the body performing the task in a seamless unit of cause and effect. It was not an unpleasant narrowing. In fact, it held a kind of peace, a freedom from the burden of continuous thought. Your mind became a quiet observer, watching your hands do what they knew how to do, and that watching was restful even as the work itself was demanding. Now in the evening quiet, you can appreciate the residue of that state without having to re-enter it. The tiredness in your body is the physical record of those hours of absorption, a ledger written in muscle and bone that tallies each shovelful without needing to count them. You do not know how many tons of rock you moved today, but your shoulders know, and your back knows, and the worn blade of the shovel knows, each in their own dialect of strain and polish and slow cooling. This collective knowledge is enough. There is no need to translate it into numbers or words. The creosote bush against which the shovel leans is an old plant, gnarled and sprawling, its branches a tangle of dark grey twigs that radiate from a central trunk, no thicker than your wrist. It has been growing here for decades, surviving the summer heat and the winter frosts, and the occasional flash flood that sends a sheet of water across the basin floor, and its roots go deep into the dry earth in search of moisture that exists only as a memory. In the daytime, the bush releases a sharp, medicinal scent that is one of the defining smells of this landscape. A smell like turpentine crossed with clean rain, and that scent intensifies in the heat until the air around the bush seems almost green with it. Now, in the cool of the evening, the scent is fainter but still present, a subtle aromatic undertone that mingles with the sage and the dust, and the lingering echo of blasting powder. The shovel, resting in the crook of two branches, seems almost to have been placed there deliberately, the angle so natural that the tool looks as though it grew out of the bush, a strange metal and wood fruit that the plant has produced for reasons of its own. You watch the dark outline of that leaning shovel while the last light drains from the sky. The object grows less distinct with each passing minute, its handle merging with the shadow of the bush, and its blade becoming only a faint suggestion of a shape, until finally you cannot separate it from the surrounding darkness at all. The shovel is still there, you know, exactly where you left it, but for the rest of the night it will be invisible, resting in the dark as you rest, waiting for the morning when your hands will find it again. That thought, if it can be called a thought, contains no anticipation or dread, only a simple recognition of the cycle that will resume when the sun returns. Tonight is for stillness, and the shovel, like you, is still. The camp spreads itself across the flat shelf of ground in the same haphazard way that sagebrush spreads across the desert, each tent finding its place not by any plan drawn on paper, but by the small decisions of men who arrived tired and looked for level ground. From where you sit on your crate, you can see the whole arrangement in the deepening twilight. 20 or 30 canvas shelters pitched at angles that follow no grid, their ropes and stakes extending outward like the roots of plants reaching into soil. The tents are all the same basic shape, a ridge pole supported by two uprights, canvas draped over the top and pegged down on the sides. Yet each one has developed its own particular character through the small modifications of its occupant: a flap tied back with a piece of colored twine, a patch stitched over a tier with thread that does not match, a name or initials scratched into the wooden crossbar. These details are visible now only as faint variations in silhouette, the darker shapes of boots or kettles or wash basins placed outside doorways like offerings left for the night. The spaces between the tents are not exactly paths, but suggestions of paths, routes that have emerged from the daily walking of feet between sleeping areas and the communal fire pit and the water wagon and the rail grade beyond. These routes are marked by faint depressions in the dirt, the soil compacted just enough to show a difference in color when the light hits it at a low angle. And you know them all without having ever consciously learned them. Your feet have traced the way to the water barrel so many times that you could walk it with your eyes closed, which you have done on moonless nights when the lantern burned out and the stars were hidden by cloud, counting the steps from tent corner to barrel without ever stumbling. That familiarity is a quiet comfort, the body knowing where it belongs even when the mind is elsewhere. Nearest to your tent, perhaps 15 paces to the left, stands the shelter belonging to a man named O'Malley, a broad-shouldered fellow from County Cork who works the pickaxe and says very little. O'Malley's tent is distinguished by the small wooden cross he has fixed to the top of the front pole, a simple construction of 2 twigs bound with copper wire that catches the last light as a tiny plus sign against the darkening sky. His fire is already lit, a small orange glow that flickers against the inside of his canvas and turns the whole tent into a paper lantern, a warm rectangle of light in the gathering blue. Through the thin fabric you can just make out his movements. A shadow bending down to place something on the ground, then straightening, then bending again. The slow pantomime of a man preparing his evening tea. He does not look out or call to you, and you do not call to him. The silence between neighbors a comfortable one that requires no filling. Beyond O'Malley's tent the line continues, if it can be called a line, a loose scatter of shelters that curve slightly as it follows the natural contour of the shelf. The next tent belongs to the 2 Swedish brothers who work as a team on the gravel gang. Their canvas slightly larger than the others because it houses 2 bedrolls and 2 sets of tools, and a small wooden chest they carried all the way from Illinois. Their fire is not yet lit, and their tent appears as a pale grey shape against the darker grey of the sagebrush behind it, the ropes sagging slightly from the dry heat of the day. The brothers themselves are somewhere inside, and you can hear their low voices conversing in a language you do not understand, the syllables rising and falling in a rhythm that is distinct from English, but carries the same tired cadence that all voices carry at this hour. To your right, the tents are spaced farther apart, with larger gaps that accommodate the communal areas of the camp. The most prominent of these is the cooking area, marked by the large iron pot that hangs from a tripod of iron poles, its bottom permanently blackened by the soot of countless fires. The pot is empty now, scraped clean after the evening meal, but a faint savory smell still lingers around it, the ghost of beans and salt pork, and the hard biscuits that soften in the steam. Beside the tripod stands the supply wagon, a heavy wooden vehicle with iron-rimmed wheels that has not moved in weeks, its canvas cover stretched tight over barrels of flour and salt and dried apples. The wagon's tongue rests on the ground, and the mules that pull it are penned in a temporary corral made of ropes and stakes. Another 50 yards east, their occasional soft snorts carrying through the still air with the lowing quality of creatures at rest. Past the cooking area, the ground drops away slightly into a shallow wash that runs from the base of the distant mountains down toward the basin floor, its course marked by a dark line of thicker vegetation. The wash is dry now, as it is for most of the year, but when the summer storms come it fills suddenly and violently, a brown torrent that foams around the rocks and recedes just as quickly, leaving behind a fresh layer of sand and the occasional uprooted bush. Tonight the wash is a silent crevice in the landscape, its presence known only by the darker shadows and the slight coolness that rises from its deeper channel, a coolness you can feel when you turn your face in that direction, a faint breath of underground moisture that reminds you that water, somewhere deep, still moves. The rail grade itself, the reason for the camp's existence, runs parallel to the wash about half a mile to the south, a raw scar of disturbed earth that stretches in both directions until it vanishes into the dusk. From here, the grade looks almost finished. A smooth, level shelf cut into the slope of the basin, its surface tamped and graded and ready for the ties and rails that will follow. But you know, having worked on it all day, that the surface is rougher than it appears from a distance, scattered with loose stones and the debris of blasting, and that the true smoothness will only come after the ballast gang has been over it with their rakes and shovels. The grade is a work in progress, as all works are, and its current state is just one moment in a long process of becoming that will continue for months and years after this camp is dismantled and moved farther west. Returning your gaze to the immediate circle of the camp, you notice the small domestic details that make each tent a miniature home. In front of the tent belonging to the cook, a wiry man named Henderson, there is a rough table made from a broken crate set on 4 flat stones, its surface holding a tin wash basin and a bar of brown soap and a folded cloth. The soap has dried into a cracked bar, its surface crazed like old pottery, and in the dull light it looks like a small geological formation, an artifact from a miniature desert. Henderson's kettle sits on a flat stone beside his fire ring, a much larger kettle than the others because he makes tea for the foreman and any man who asks, and it steams gently into the evening air with a thin wisp that rises straight up for a foot and then dissolves. The foreman's tent is slightly apart from the others, pitched on a small rise that gives him a view of the whole camp and the grade beyond, his position a modest eminence that reflects the structure of the work without requiring any announcement. His tent is no larger than the others and is made of the same canvas, but it stands alone with a few extra feet of space on every side, a small buffer of emptiness that serves as a boundary between his authority and the men he oversees. A lantern hangs from the front pole of his tent, already lit, its flame a steady yellow point that does not flicker, and by its light you can see the foreman sitting on a folding stool, writing something in a small leather-bound book, his pen moving with a slow and deliberate pace. He does not look up, absorbed in his record-keeping, and his concentration becomes just another element of the camp's quiet industry, a different kind of labor that continues after the physical labor has ceased. Behind the tents, to the north, the land rises in a gradual slope toward the foothills of the mountains, a long incline covered in the same patchy mixture of sagebrush and bare dirt that covers everything here. The plants on that slope are spaced widely, each bush claiming its own territory of soil and shadow, and in the dim light they look like a herd of dark animals bedded down for the night, motionless and patient. Higher up the slope the bushes thin out and give way to bare rock, pale granite, and darker volcanic stone that catches the last light as a faint gleam. A high grey wall that forms the northern boundary of the basin. The mountains themselves are a presence more felt than seen, their massive weight shaping the weather and the light and the movement of water over centuries. But at this hour they have softened into a deep blue silhouette that seems to float between earth and sky. The sky above the mountains has now reached the stage of twilight where the brightest stars begin to appear, not suddenly but one by one, tiny points of light that emerge from the deepening blue as if the color were draining away to reveal them. The first star you notice directly overhead is a steady white spark that seems to pulse very slightly, a twinkle caused by the atmosphere rather than the star itself, and you watch it for a while without thinking, your vision resting on that single point of light while the rest of the sky continues its slow transformation. More stars follow, appearing first in the east and then spreading across the dome, the familiar patterns of the constellations assembling themselves with the same patient regularity that you observe every night. The Big Dipper hangs low in the north, its handle pointing toward the horizon, and Cassiopeia forms its crooked W in the northeast. And somewhere to the south the faint glow of the Milky Way has begun to hint at its eventual full appearance, a soft luminous band that will become clearer as the night deepens. Back at the level of the ground, the camp's small fires have multiplied as other men have finished their suppers and settled into their evening routines. Each fire is a small orange glow, with a figure seated beside it. The face is lit from below in the way that makes features look both familiar and strange. The hollows of the eyes deepened, and the ridges of the cheekbones emphasized. The figures are still, mostly, just shapes in the firelight, who occasionally reach forward to adjust a stick or place a kettle closer to the flame, their movements slow with the deliberation of tired bodies. The collective light from all these fires creates a soft ambient glow that illuminates the camp from within, a warm island of visibility in the larger darkness of the basin, and you can see the ground between the tents in a dim way. The texture of the dirt and the shapes of stones and the dark lines of tent ropes, all visible as subtle variations of shadow. The sounds of the camp have settled into a steady bass note, a composite hum made of many small individual sounds that blend together into a single texture. Beneath the chirping of the crickets, and the occasional hummed fragment from Callahan's tent, and the distant lowing of the mules, there is a deeper quiet, a silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of a vast space that surrounds and contains all the small noises. That space is the desert itself. The miles of open land stretching in every direction, land that holds the sound of the camp as a small jewel held in a large hand, precious but tiny against the scale of the mountains and the sky. You feel that scale now as a gentle pressure on the edges of your awareness, not frightening or lonely, but simply vast and calm, a reminder that the camp is a temporary arrangement of canvas and wood, placed on a ground that has been here long before and will be here long after. The dust that drifts into the tents, the wind that tugs at the ropes, the sun that bleaches the canvas, all of these are expressions of the larger desert that surrounds and sustains and slowly erodes every human thing. You are part of that larger process, a small moving element in the slow equation, and the recognition of that fact is not a diminishing one, but a peaceful one. A letting go of the need to be anything more than a man sitting beside his tent, watching the stars come out over the mountains of Nevada. You lean forward on the crate, your spine curving with the slow deliberation of a branch bending under a gradual weight, and you reach toward the ring of stones where the small pile of kindling has been waiting all this time. The movement is simple, unthinking, your hand extending into the cool air between your knee and the fire ring, your fingers opening to receive whatever they will find. What they find is a dry sage twig no thicker than a pencil, its surface rough and peeling, the bark curling away in thin grey strips that crinkle when you touch them. You pick it up with the care you might use to lift a fragile thing, though it is not fragile, and you hold it for a moment just above the stone ring, feeling its negligible weight, its brittleness, its readiness to be transformed. The sage twig is one of dozens you gathered yesterday morning before the work began. Walking out into the desert with a canvas sack slung over your shoulder while the sky was still pale with the first hint of dawn. You remember the act of gathering now as a quiet prelude to the day's labor, your boots scuffing through the dry brush, your hands selecting only the deadest wood, the twigs that snap cleanly at the lightest pressure. Those twigs have been sitting in a small heap beside the tent all day, baking in the sun, losing whatever residual moisture they once held, and now they are as dry as paper, as eager to burn as any material in nature. You place the first twig across the tiny pyramid of kindling inside the ring, laying it with the same careful attention you would give to placing a tool back on its shelf, and then you reach for another. The kindling pile grows by increments, each twig finding its place in a crisscross pattern that you arrange without needing to think about it, your hands knowing the architecture of a good fire from countless repetitions. Two thicker pieces form the base, resting flat on the bottom of the ring, their ends touching the inner edges of the stones. Across them you lay a series of thinner twigs in parallel lines, each one spaced by the width of a finger, and then a second layer at right angles to the first, and then a loose handful of crushed sage leaves stuffed into the spaces beneath the crossing points. The structure is small and neat and purposeful, a tiny engineered thing that will soon be consumed by the very process it is designed to start. And as you place the last twig on the top of the pile, you sit back on the crate and regard your work with the mild satisfaction of a task completed. The air around you has cooled enough that the skin on your arms is now definitely prickled, the small hairs standing up in their follicles and creating a texture like fine sandpaper when you run your palm across your forearm. The temperature has dropped perhaps 10 degrees since the sun set, a change that is typical for the high desert where the thin dry air cannot hold the day's heat. And that drop will continue through the night until just before dawn, when the cold reaches its peak and the water in the cask will have a thin skin of ice if the night is particularly clear. You do not mind the cold, having slept in it many times, but the thought of warmth is a pleasant one, a small anticipation that makes the fire seem like a gift you are about to receive rather than a task you must perform. You reach into the pocket of your canvas trousers, your fingers finding the small cardboard box of lucifer matches that you have carried there since the supply wagon last visited the camp. The box is flattened slightly from weeks of being pressed against your thigh, its corners soft, and its label faded to an illegible pale blue. But the matches inside are still dry and straight, their red heads intact and their wooden stems firm. You slide the box open with your thumb, the cardboard rasping against itself with a tiny sound, and you select a single match, drawing it out carefully so as not to disturb its neighbors. The match is a slender splinter of pine, pale yellow and smooth, with a bulb of dark red compound at the tip that looks like a tiny berry growing from the end of a twig. You hold it between your thumb and forefinger, feeling its fragility, its potential. The striking surface on the side of the box is roughened from many previous uses, the black coating worn away in patches to reveal the brown cardboard beneath. But there is enough texture remaining to do the work. You press the match head against that surface with a light but firm pressure, and you draw it across in a single quick motion that produces a soft scraping sound, followed immediately by a small hiss. The match head ignites, a tiny globe of yellow light blooming at the tip, and for a moment that light illuminates your hand, and the matchbox and the nearest stones of the fire ring with a warm glow that seems disproportionately bright against the dimness of the twilight. The flame steadies itself, a perfect teardrop of fire with a blue center and a yellow corona, and you cup your other hand around it to shield it from the slight breeze that might or might not be stirring. That flame, small as it is, carries a remarkable heat that you can feel on your palm even from a distance of several inches. A concentrated warmth that radiates outward in all directions, and that seems to push back against the cool air with a gentle insistence. You lower the match slowly toward the kindling pile, aiming for the crushed sage leaves stuffed beneath the crossing twigs, and when the flame touches the first leaf, it catches immediately, the dry material igniting with a soft puff that sends a thin ribbon of fire curling upward. The flame spreads, finding the next leaf and the next, a tiny orange wave that moves across the surface of the kindling with the speed of a thought, and within a few seconds the whole base of the pile is burning, the flames small but numerous, each one feeding on the oil-rich sage and growing brighter as it consumes. You drop the match into the center of the fire, its wooden stem already charring black, and you watch it curl and twist in the heat before it too catches and burns with a brief bright flare. The fire has now established itself, the flames no longer individual flickers, but a single unified glow that wraps around the twigs and begins to climb upward through the crisscross layers. The sound of the fire is a soft crackling, a gentle snapping and popping that comes from the moisture trapped in the wood cells, expanding and bursting, and this sound is so familiar to you that it registers not as noise, but as silence, a form of quiet that is more comforting than true quiet, because it signifies warmth and light, and the continuation of a very old human practice. The smoke rises straight up from the fire, a pale grey column no thicker than your wrist, and it carries the clean, sharp scent of burning sage that is one of the defining smells of this landscape and this life. That scent fills your nostrils with a pleasant sharpness, a resinous aroma that is both aromatic and slightly medicinal, and you breathe it in deeply, letting it replace the metallic tang of blasting powder that has been the dominant note all day. The smoke column rises perhaps 10 feet into the air before it dissipates, spreading out into a thin haze that hangs above the camp and catches the light of the other fires, a shared atmosphere that all the tents contribute to and share. You lean back on the crate again, the immediate task of lighting the fire now complete, and you feel a small release of tension that you had not noticed you were holding. The fire will need tending later, another twig added here and a larger piece of wood placed there, but for now it is sufficient, a small self-sustaining system that converts the stored energy of desert plants into light and warmth at a steady rate. The flames are still growing, reaching higher as they find purchase on the thicker twigs, and the light they cast expands outward in a circle that pushes the darkness back by a few feet, creating a small intimate sphere of visibility around your campsite. The sagebrush beyond that circle remains invisible, the darkness complete, and the contrast makes your small fire seem like a ship at sea, a solitary point of warmth on an ocean of cool desert air. The warmth of the fire reaches your face now, a gentle radiant heat that you feel on your cheeks and forehead and the bridge of your nose, the parts of you that are most directly exposed to the night. That warmth is not intense, not the fierce heat of a large bonfire, but a mild and even glow that reminds you of sunlight filtered through a thin cloud. Present enough to be noticed, but not enough to make you uncomfortable. You turn your head slightly, presenting first one cheek and then the other to the flames, a slow rotation that distributes the warmth evenly and feels, in its small way, like a luxury. Your hands, still resting on your knees, are now within the circle of warmth as well, and the stiffness that had begun to settle into your knuckles from the cooling air starts to ease, the blood moving more freely through the small vessels close to the skin. The fire has now reached the stage where it is no longer tentative, but established. The flames are steady yellow-orange that flicker in a continuous dance without any individual flame holding its shape for more than a fraction of a second. The base of the fire is a bed of glowing embers already forming, the twigs that were the foundation of the pile having burned through and collapsed into a small heap of orange coals that pulse with a deeper, steadier light. These coals are the heart of the fire, the repository of its true heat, and they will remain hot for hours even after the flames have died down, a banked warmth that can be revived with a breath or the addition of more fuel. You watch the coals forming with the same passive attention you have given to everything else this evening, observing the process without needing to intervene. A small adjustment occurs to you, not as a thought but as an impulse, and you reach to the small pile of fuel beside the fire ring and select a thicker stick, a piece of sage root perhaps as thick as your thumb and as long as your forearm. This stick is denser than the twigs, its wood darker and heavier, and it will burn more slowly, providing a sustained heat rather than a quick flare. You place it carefully across the top of the fire, resting its ends on the stones of the ring so that the middle of the stick sits directly above the flames, and you watch as the fire begins to investigate this new material, small flames licking at the underside of the wood and testing its resistance. The stick will take several minutes to catch fully, its greater mass requiring more heat to reach the point of ignition, but once it does catch, it will burn for half an hour or more, a steady log that will simplify the tending of the fire and allow you to sit without constantly adding smaller pieces. You settle back into your seat, the crate solid and familiar beneath you, and you let your gaze rest on the fire with the same calm attention you might give to a painting or a view. The flames are endlessly variable, their shapes shifting and reforming in a pattern that repeats without ever exactly duplicating, and watching them is a form of meditation that requires no effort and produces no insight, just a gentle absorption in the play of light and heat. The yellow of the flames grades into orange at the tips and blue at the base, and the light illuminates the surrounding stones and the trampled dirt of the campsite with a warm amber glow that makes everything look softer and more hospitable. Even the coarse weave of your canvas trousers, which in daylight looks rough and utilitarian, takes on a rich texture in the firelight, the shadows deepening in the folds and the highlights catching on the raised threads. The sounds of the fire have settled into a steady rhythm, a continuous low crackle punctuated by occasional louder pops when a pocket of trapped moisture or resin bursts open in the heat. These sounds are so regular and so unremarkable that they quickly fade from conscious attention, becoming part of the background texture of the evening, along with the crickets and the distant voices and the soft rustle of the tent canvas. The fire is now simply there, a presence rather than an event, and you share its space with the same quiet coexistence that you share with the mountains and the stars and the cooling earth beneath your boots. The fire has settled into itself now, the flames no longer reaching and exploring but burning with a steady composure, and you decide without any particular urgency that the time has come to heat water for tea. The decision arises not as a conscious thought, but as a gentle impulse, a recognition that your throat is slightly dry from the day's dust, and that a warm mug held between your palms would be a pleasant thing as the evening continues to cool. You rise from the crate in stages, first leaning forward to shift your weight onto your feet, then straightening your knees with the slow care of a body that has been still for some time, and finally standing fully upright, your head now above the level of the tent ridge, and your perspective on the camp slightly altered by the new height. The blackened tin kettle sits on a flat stone beside the fire ring where you left it this morning, its surface dull and sooty and covered with a fine grey dust that settles on everything in this landscape. You pick it up by its wire handle, feeling the rough texture of the metal and the slight give of the wire where it has been bent and rebent over many uses, and you carry it the few paces to where the wooden water cask stands beside the tent opening. The cask is a stout barrel bound with iron hoops. Its staves dark with moisture that seeps slowly through the grain and evaporates before it can drip, and a wooden spigot projects from its lower end, turned upward now in the closed position. You place the kettle beneath the spigot, its bottom resting on the packed dirt, and you reach for the spigot handle with the same unhurried motion you have used for everything else this evening. The spigot turns with a slight wooden creak, and water begins to flow, a thin clear stream that catches the firelight as it falls and splashes softly into the bottom of the kettle. The sound of the water filling the metal vessel is a gentle one, a liquid note that rises in pitch as the kettle fills, and you watch the stream without impatience, letting it run until the kettle is nearly full and the water level sits a finger's width below the rim. You close the spigot with another quarter turn, the flow dwindling to a drip and then stopping altogether, and you lift the kettle carefully, now heavier by several pounds, the water sloshing very slightly as you carry it back toward the fire. Your steps are measured, your attention on the kettle's rim to ensure no water spills, and the short journey from cask to fire ring feels longer than it is because of that focused care. You set the kettle onto the small iron grate that spans the fire ring, a simple grid of 3 parallel bars that you placed there weeks ago and have never moved. The grate is black with soot and faintly glowing at its center where the flames have been licking it, and the kettle settles onto it with a small clink of metal on metal, the sound sharp and brief and then gone. The water inside the kettle is perfectly still, its surface a dark circle that reflects a tiny distorted image of the flames above it, and you stand for a moment looking down at that reflection, seeing the fire dance upside down in miniature on the water's skin. Then you return to your crate, sitting down with the same gradual lowering of weight that you used to rise, and you settle back into your familiar position, your hands returning to your knees, your gaze returning to the fire. The wait begins. This wait is a long, formless space that has no predetermined length and no milestones to mark its progress, just the slow transfer of heat from the flames through the iron grate and into the tin bottom of the kettle, and from there into the water itself. You know from long experience that this will take some time, that water in a thin tin kettle over a small sage fire does not boil quickly, and that knowledge removes any expectation of speed. The wait becomes simply another element of the evening, no different from sitting or breathing or watching the stars appear, a period of suspension in which nothing is required of you except patience, which you have in abundance at this hour. The fire continues its steady work, the flames wrapping around the bottom of the kettle and licking up its sides in small orange tongues that leave faint trails of soot on the metal. The kettle absorbs this heat without any visible change, its blackened surface looking exactly the same as it did when you set it down, but you know that inside the water is slowly warming, the molecules beginning to move faster, the temperature rising by degrees too small to feel. This invisible process is happening even though there is no sign of it. A hidden transformation that will only reveal itself when it reaches its culmination, and the thought of that hiddenness is a quiet satisfaction, a trust in the reliability of physical laws that will not fail you. After some minutes, measured not by any clock but by the gradual deepening of the darkness beyond the firelight, a faint whisper stirs inside the metal. It is so quiet at first that you are not sure you have heard it, a sound like a single grain of sand rolling across a sheet of paper, and then it comes again, slightly louder, a tiny sizzle from the bottom of the kettle where the water is beginning to form small bubbles on the heated tin. This whisper is the first announcement that the process is advancing, the first audible evidence of the change that has been occurring invisibly, and you receive it with the mild interest of a listener who has heard this sound many times before and will hear it many times again. The whisper grows into a low hum, a continuous sound that seems to come from everywhere inside the kettle at once, a vibration that you can feel as much as hear, a subtle resonance that travels through the metal and into the air and reaches your ears as a steady, soft, musical note. This hum is the voice of the water approaching its transformation, the collective murmur of countless tiny bubbles forming on the heated bottom and rising a short distance before collapsing back into the liquid, their brief lives ending in a puff of steam too small to see. The hum is soothing in its steadiness, a drone note that reminds you of bees in a distant field or wind moving through a narrow gap, and you let it fill your ears without needing to analyze it or name it. The soft tink-tink of tiny bubbles follows, individual sounds that separate themselves from the general hum like single raindrops from a gentle shower. Each tink is the sound of a bubble detaching from the kettle bottom and rising through the water to pop at the surface. A small sharp note that rings faintly in the metal and then fades. These tinks come more and more frequently as the water continues to heat, their rhythm accelerating from isolated events to a steady patter, and then they merge together into a continuous silvery shushing that replaces the earlier hum with a brighter, more lively sound. The kettle is singing now, a quiet song of heating water that fills the space around your campfire and blends with the crackle of the flames and the distant chirp of the crickets into a single peaceful texture. Steam begins to rise from the spout of the kettle, at first just a faint wisp that is barely visible against the dark sky, then a thicker plume that curls upward in a white column and dissipates a few feet above the fire. The steam carries the clean smell of hot water, a smell that is not really a smell so much as an absence of smell, a humid blankness that briefly replaces the sage and the dust and the blasting powder before those scents return. You watch the steam rise with the same passive attention you have given to the flames and the stars, observing its movement without needing to interpret it, and you notice that the plume wavers slightly when the breeze stirs, bending to one side before straightening again. The boiling, when it arrives, does so without drama. The shushing sound deepens into a low, rolling gurgle, and the surface of the water inside the kettle becomes turbulent, breaking into large, lazy bubbles that rise and burst with soft, plopping sounds. Steam pours from the spout in a vigorous white jet, and the kettle lid, a simple tin disc with a small loop handle, begins to rattle very gently against the rim, a tiny percussive addition to the kettle's song. You lean forward and lift the lid with a careful finger hooked through the loop, the metal warm but not burning, and you set it aside on a flat stone while you watch the water roll and churn inside the kettle. The boiling water is a mesmerizing thing, its surface in constant motion, its depths clear and pure except for the fine mineral sediment that has settled to the bottom from weeks of use, a faint reddish-brown dust that drifts in the currents but does not cloud the water. You have reached the moment you were waiting for, and the long formless space of the wait is now behind you, replaced by the immediate task of making tea. The kettle will stay hot for some time, its thick iron bottom retaining the heat even after you remove it from the grate, and there is no hurry to use it right away. You let the water boil for another minute, watching the steam rise into the darkening sky where it joins the smoke from the fire and the general haze above the camp, a small contribution to the collective atmosphere that all the tents are generating. The night has deepened fully now, the blue overhead gone to black, the stars bright and steady, and your small fire-lit circle feels even more like a room with walls of darkness and a ceiling of stars, a cozy chamber whose boundaries are defined by the reach of the firelight and the sound of the singing kettle. The kettle has been boiling for a minute now, its steam rising into the night in a steady white plume that catches the firelight and blows faintly before dispersing. And you decide that the time has come to prepare your evening meal. You rise from the crate once more, your body moving with the same slow economy of motion that has marked every action since you sat down, and you step around the fire ring to where your canvas haversack hangs from a wooden peg driven into the tent pole. The haversack is a simple bag of heavy cotton duck, its surface stained with the dark patches of old moisture and the pale dust of many miles, and its brass buckle, once shiny, has acquired the dull patina of age and handling. You lift the flap and reach inside with the unerring knowledge of a space you have explored countless times, your fingers moving past the sewing kit and the spare bootlaces and the folded bandana until they find what they are seeking. The hard biscuit is the first thing you retrieve, a disc of baked flour and water about the width of your palm and nearly an inch thick, its surface pale brown and dimpled with the impressions of the baker's fingers. This biscuit, one of a dozen you drew from the supply wagon 3 days ago, has the density of a small stone and approximately the same degree of give when you press your thumbnail into its edge, which is to say, none at all. It is designed this way, not for immediate pleasure, but for durability, a foodstuff that can survive weeks in a canvas bag under the desert sun, without molding or crumbling, and its hardness is a feature rather than a flaw, a guarantee that it will be there when you need it. You hold the biscuit in your open palm for a moment, feeling its weight and its smooth underside where the dough was pressed against a flat baking surface, and then you close your fingers around it and carry it back to your seat by the fire. The second item from the haversack is a small lump of dried apple, a pale brown ring with a hole in the center where the core was removed before drying. The apple piece is leathery and flexible, its surface wrinkled into complex patterns of tiny folds, and it retains a faint ghost of its original sweetness that you can smell when you bring it close to your nose. This apple came from an orchard somewhere far to the east, perhaps in Ohio or Pennsylvania, and it was sliced and dried in the sun and packed into barrels that traveled by wagon and rail and wagon again before reaching this camp in the Nevada desert. A journey that followed the same route you have followed, but in reverse, tracing the line of the railroad back to the green places that now exist only in your memory. You place the apple ring on your knee, its faint stickiness adhering slightly to the fabric of your trousers, and you reach into the haversack once more. The tea leaves are wrapped in a small twist of brown paper, a cone-shaped packet folded with the precision of long practice, its ends tucked in so that no leaf can escape. The paper crackles softly when you pick it up, a dry sound like the rustle of a tiny leaf, and you can feel the granular texture of the tea through the thin wrapping. A multitude of small dark fragments shifting against each other with a subtle friction. This twist holds enough tea for perhaps 4 or 5 cups, a week's supply if you are sparing with it, and the leaves inside are a coarse black cut that smells faintly of hay and distant smoke, a smell that deepens when you open the packet and release the concentrated aroma that has been trapped inside. You do not open it yet. You simply place the twist on your knee beside the apple ring, aligning the 3 items in a small row on your lap, and you settle back onto the crate to begin the slow process of transforming these raw materials into a meal. The biscuit is the first to receive your attention, since it requires no preparation beyond the application of patience. You hold it in both hands now, turning it over slowly, feeling its surfaces with the pads of your thumbs. One side is slightly darker than the other, a patch of deeper brown where the oven heat was more intense, and that side has a faint sheen like worn leather. The edges of the biscuit are rough, the dough having been cut with a tin circle that left tiny jagged peaks, and these peaks have worn down slightly from the rubbing of other biscuits in the bag, but are still sharp enough to feel. You lean forward toward the fire, not close enough to risk a spark on your sleeve, but near enough to feel the warmth on your hands, and you hold the biscuit out toward the flames with the same gentle attention you gave to placing the kindling earlier this evening. The purpose of this gesture is not to cook the biscuit, which is already fully baked and completely dry, but simply to warm it, to take the night chill off its surface and make it slightly less like holding a piece of cool stone. The fire's radiant heat washes over the biscuit and over your hands together, a gentle wave of warmth that you can feel sinking into the outer layer of the flour and into the skin of your knuckles. You rotate the biscuit slowly, presenting each face to the fire in turn, and as it warms it releases a very faint scent, a mild toasted aroma that is too subtle to be called bread-like but is nonetheless pleasant, a dry and dusty smell that hints at the wheat fields where the flour began its existence. You are in no hurry to eat, and the warming of the biscuit becomes a small ritual in itself, a pause that extends the transition from work to rest by a few more minutes. When the biscuit has absorbed enough warmth to satisfy you, you draw it back into your lap and race it to your mouth. The first bite requires a careful approach, your teeth finding a purchase on the edge and applying slow, steady pressure until a small piece cracks away with a sound like a dry twig snapping. The fragment sits on your tongue, hard and angular, and you begin the patient process of softening it with saliva, moving it around your mouth while the moisture gradually penetrates the dense structure of the baked flour. The taste is mild, almost absent, a faint graininess that is more texture than flavor, with a very slight saltiness that lingers at the back of your tongue. Chewing this biscuit is not a hurried act. It is a slow, meditative grinding that occupies your jaw with a gentle rhythm, and you find that the rhythm of chewing blends with the rhythm of the fire's crackle into a single steady pattern of small sounds and small motions. Between bites, you lower the biscuit to your lap and let your gaze drift across the shapes in the embers. The glowing coals that have built up at the base of the fire and now pulse with a deep orange light. The embers are not uniform, some are bright and active, their surfaces crawling with tiny blue flames that appear and vanish, while others have cooled to a dark red crust that cracks when the heat beneath expands and reveals the glowing interior. The shapes the embers form are shapes without meaning, abstract patterns that shift and reform as the fire consumes its fuel, and you watch them without attempting to interpret them, simply observing the play of light and shadow with the same calm acceptance you give to clouds or stars. Another bite follows, the biscuit cracked and chewed, the embers watched, the night deepening. The dried apple ring is the next to receive your attention. You reach for the tin cup that sits upside down on its flat stone, the same chipped enamel mug you will use for the tea, and you turn it right side up and set it on the ground between your boots. The inside of the cup is stained with the dark residue of many previous cups of tea, a brown patina that no amount of rinsing will remove, and a small crack runs from the rim down one side, a crack that does not leak but is darkened into a fine brown line like a strand of hair pressed into the enamel. Into this cup you pour a small amount of water from the kettle, tipping the heavy vessel carefully with both hands so that only a thin stream emerges from the spout, splashing into the cup with a sound that is higher and brighter than the sound of the kettle filling earlier. The water is still near boiling, and steam rises from the cup in a small puff that fades quickly. You take the dried apple ring from your knee and lower it into the hot water, watching as the liquid closes over its surface and the apple begins to absorb the moisture with a visible eagerness. The leathery flesh softens almost immediately, its wrinkles swelling and smoothing out, its color shifting from a dull brown to a warmer amber that hints at the fruit it once was. The water in the cup takes on a faint golden tint, a weak tea of apple essence that will be part of the drink when the fruit is eaten, and the scent that rises from the cup is suddenly sweet and familiar, the smell of autumn orchards and sun-warmed grass, a smell so out of place in this desert that it feels like a small visitation from another world. You leave the apple to soak, its ring drifting to the bottom of the cup and settling there, and you turn your attention back to the biscuit in your hand, taking another slow bite while the fruit softens. The soaking takes several minutes, and during that time you eat the rest of the biscuit, breaking off small pieces and chewing each one thoroughly, your jaw moving in its steady, slow rhythm while your eyes rest on the fire and your mind drifts without direction. The last piece of biscuit is a small triangular fragment that you hold in your mouth for a long time, letting it dissolve completely rather than crunching it, and when it is gone, you swallow and feel the slight bulk of it settling in your stomach, a modest weight that signals the beginning of satiety. The biscuit is not a large meal, and it will not fill you completely, but it is enough for now. Enough to take the edge off the day's hunger and provide the body with a small store of energy that will carry you through the night. With the spoon you do not have, for you own no spoon, having lost it months ago in a river crossing, you use instead a clean twig, stripped of its bark, a makeshift utensil that you retrieve from the kindling pile and rinse with a splash of water from the cask. The twig is smooth and pale, about the length of your index finger, and you use it to fish the softened apple ring from the cup, lifting it carefully and holding it above the water to let the excess drip back. The apple has transformed utterly from its dried state. It is now plump and tender, its flesh giving easily when you press it between your fingers, its color a rich golden brown that glistens with moisture. You transfer the apple to your mouth, biting into it with a gentle pressure that yields a surprising burst of sweetness, a concentrated fruit flavor that spreads across your tongue and fills your mouth with the taste of orchards and summer. The texture is soft and slightly chewy, the fiber of the apple having broken down without disintegrating, and you chew it slowly, savoring the sweetness that is the only sugar you will taste today. When the apple is finished, you drink the soaking water directly from the cup, the faintly flavored liquid warm and comforting, carrying the last traces of apple into your throat. Now only the tea remains, the final element of your supper, and the one that will occupy your hands and your attention for the longest time. You lift the kettle from its grate by the wire handle, the hot metal warming through the protective callus of your palm, and you set it down on the flat stone beside the fire ring where it will be stable. The water inside is still mere boiling, its surface settling from the jostle of movement into a calm clarity, and the steam has diminished to a thin curl that rises from the spout with a soft hiss. You take the twist of brown paper from your knee and carefully undo the folded end, opening the packet to reveal the dark tea leaves inside. The leaves are small and curled, some rolled into tight balls and others flat and flaky. Their color a deep brown that is almost black, and the smell that rises from the opened packet is rich and earthy. The concentrated essence of dried leaves that have been withered and rolled and oxidized into a form that will release its flavor into hot water with a slow generosity. You pick up the chipped enamel mug, now empty of the apple water, and you sprinkle a small pinch of tea leaves directly into its bottom, watching as the dark fragments scatter across the white enamel surface like specks of soil on snow. The amount is measured by habit, a quantity your fingers know without counting, enough to produce a strong cup of tea without wasting the limited supply. The remaining leaves you seal back into the paper twist, folding the ends carefully so that no stray leaf can escape, and you return the packet to your knee while you lift the kettle once more. The pouring of the water is a moment of quiet precision, your left hand holding the mug steady while your right hand tips the kettle forward with a slow, controlled motion. The steaming water emerges from the spout in a smooth arc, a silver column that splashes into the mug and immediately turns a pale golden brown as it meets the tea leaves. The leaves, stirred by the incoming water, swirl upward from the bottom in a small dark cloud, and then they begin to separate, some floating to the surface while others sink back down to rest. The water level rises, the color deepening from golden to amber to a rich reddish brown that is exactly the color of old leather left in the sun, and you stop pouring when the mug is nearly full, leaving a small space at the top to prevent spills. The steam that rises from the mug now carries a new note, the sharp, clean scent of brewed tea mingling with the residual aroma of sage from the fire, a combination that is as familiar to you as your own name. You set the kettle aside and wrap both hands around the warm mug, your palms pressing against the smooth enamel surface and your fingers interlacing on the far side. The heat of the tea transfers through the thin metal wall and into your skin with a steady, penetrating warmth that feels almost medicinal, a heat that sinks past the calluses and into the muscles and joints beneath. Your palms, roughened by the shovel handle, absorb the warmth gratefully, and you feel the stiffness that had been settling into your knuckles begin to ease, the small joints loosening and relaxing. The warmth spreads from your palms upward into your wrists, following the path of the veins and tendons, and then it travels farther, up through your forearms, a slow tide of comfort that washes through the tired tissues with the patience of water rising in a well. You hold the mug close to your chest, not drinking yet, simply feeling the warmth radiate into your body, and watching the steam curl upward in a small dancing plume that catches the firelight and glows for a moment before vanishing. The tea needs time to steep, and you're in no hurry to rush it, so you sit with the mug cradled in your hands and let the minutes pass without counting them. The surface of the tea is dark and still now, the leaves having sunk to the bottom where they form a loose sediment, and the color has deepened to its final shade, a dense mahogany that is opaque when you look down into it. The aroma rising from the mug has mellowed, the sharp edge of the dry leaves giving way to a rounder, smoother fragrance that smells of comfort and quiet, and the end of a long day. Around you the camp has grown quieter still, the other men having finished their own meals and settled into their tents, the fires beginning to burn down to embers, and the only sounds that reach you now are the soft pop of your own fire and the distant, intermittent call of a night bird, somewhere out in the dark basin. When you finally raise the mug to your lips, you do so with a slow, careful motion, tilting it just enough to let the hot liquid touch your mouth. The first sip is small, a cautious taste that you hold on your tongue for a moment before swallowing, and the flavor that spreads through your mouth is bitter and warm and deeply familiar. The taste of boiled tea leaves without milk or sugar, a plain and honest taste that requires no embellishment. The bitterness is not unpleasant. It is a clean, dry bitterness that cuts through the lingering sweetness of the apple and leaves your mouth feeling refreshed, a sensation that matches the coolness of the night air on your face and the warmth of the fire on your knees. You take another sip, slightly larger, and let it warm your throat as it goes down, feeling the heat travel all the way to your stomach where it meets the small weight of the biscuit and the apple and combines into a gentle sensation of fullness. The mug will take perhaps 15 minutes to empty, given the pace at which you are drinking, and that 15 minutes stretches ahead of you with no demands and no interruptions, a quiet span of time that belongs entirely to the simple act of holding a warm vessel and watching a fire and being still. You settle deeper into your seat, your spine relaxing into a gentle curve, your shoulders dropping another fraction of an inch, and you hold the tea in your hands as though it were the most important thing in the world, which for this moment it is. The tea is finished now, the last sip taken, and the empty mug resting on the flat stone beside your crate, its interior still warm and stained, a deeper brown where the leaves settled at the bottom, and you tilt your head back just enough to look up at the sky that has been darkening above you all this time without your direct attention. The motion is slow, your neck bending with the same deliberate ease that has characterized every movement this evening, and as your gaze lifts from the firelit circle of your camper to the vast dome overhead, the change in scale is so complete that it feels like stepping from a small room into an enormous hall. The firelight, which seemed bright and warm at ground level, becomes a tiny orange dot in your peripheral vision, a single candle in an ocean of darkness, and the sky opens above you in layers of depth that pull your attention upward through distances too vast to comprehend. The stars have come out not one by one, but in whole clusters, as if someone had scattered a handful of fine white sand across a sheet of black velvet and the grains had stuck where they landed. They are not uniform in brightness. Some burn with a steady silver-white intensity that makes them seem closer, while others are so faint that you can only see them by looking slightly to the side, your peripheral vision more sensitive than your direct gaze. The brighter stars form the familiar patterns you have known since childhood, the constellations that sailors and farmers and railway navvies have used to find their way across dark landscapes, and you trace these patterns with your eyes without consciously naming them, simply recognizing the shapes as you would recognizing the faces of old friends. The Big Dipper hangs low in the northern sky, with its handle curving toward the horizon. Cassiopeia forms its crooked W in the northeast, and directly overhead the bright star Vega shines with a steady blue-white light that seems to pulse very slightly due to the movement of the atmosphere, rather than the star itself. The Milky Way has now fully emerged, a faint cloudy band that stretches from the southern horizon all the way across the zenith and down toward the north, its edges soft and indistinct, its center a dense river of uncountable stars that blend together into a continuous luminous haze. You have seen this sight many times on many nights, from many campsites along the length of the railroad grade, and each time it produces the same quiet response in you, a feeling that is not quite awe and not quite comfort, but something between the two, a recognition of scale that makes your own small concerns seem appropriately sized. The Milky Way is not dramatic, not a sudden revelation, but a steady presence that has been there every clear night of your life, and will be there every clear night after you are gone, and the thought of that continuity is as calming as the warmth of the tea was calming. A different kind of warmth that settles into a different part of you. The darkness between the stars is not empty, but textured, a deep blue-black that varies in intensity across the dome of the sky, and your eyes, now fully adjusted to the night, can detect subtle gradations in that darkness that were invisible when you first looked up. Some patches are slightly paler, the afterglow of the set sun still affecting the western horizon with a faint wash of deep indigo, while other patches, particularly in the east, are so dark they seem almost solid, a blackness so complete it looks like velvet stretched tight. The stars within these darker regions appear brighter by contrast, their light undimmed by any competing glow, and the overall effect is of a great depth, a three-dimensional space that extends outward forever, layer upon layer of darkness and light, receding into distances that have no end. A very slight breeze moves now, the first real movement of air you have felt since you sat down, and it comes from the west with a coolness that carries the scent of the distant mountains. This breeze is not strong enough to stir the embers of your fire or to flap the canvas of the tent. It is just a gentle flow against your cheek that feels like the desert breathing, a slow exhalation that has been traveling across the basin for hours and arriving at your camp with the last of its momentum. The breeze carries the creosote smell of the desert after sundown, a cool and medicinal aroma that is different from the sharp sage of your fire, cleaner and more austere, the scent of plants that have adapted to drought by filling their leaves with oils that protect them from the sun. This smell mingles with the smoke from your fire and the distant hint of the other campfires, creating a layered atmosphere that is specific to this place and this hour, a unique perfume that will never be exactly repeated. The canvas of your tent responds to the breeze with a soft whisper, the fabric shifting against its poles and ropes with a sound like a hand brushing across a page of old paper. And then it falls still again, the gust having passed onward to stir the next tent and the next, a ripple of movement that travels through the camp like a wave through water. You listen to that ripple as it moves away, the soft susurration of canvas after canvas growing fainter until it fades into the distance. And then the stillness returns, deeper than before because it was briefly interrupted. The tent flap, which you left tied open, moves very slightly on its cord, a gentle swaying that catches your eye as a dark shape oscillating against the darker background, and after a few seconds it too comes to rest, its momentum spent. The stars continue to hold your attention, and you find that the longer you look, the more you see. Faint stars that were invisible a minute ago now appear at the edges of your vision, tiny points of light that emerge from the darkness like dust settling in reverse, and the space between the visible stars fills in with a fine grain of barely perceptible light that is not individual stars but the collective glow of millions of stars too distant to resolve. The sky is not a flat surface but a volume, and your eyes, given time, begin to perceive that volume, the nearer stars seeming to float in front of the farther ones, the whole arrangement, a slow dance of depth and brightness that changes as the earth turns beneath it. You could trace the Milky Way with your eyes for long minutes, without finishing, following its twists and branches and dark lanes, and the thought of doing so, of simply watching the sky for an hour or more, is a pleasant one that requires no commitment. Your neck, still tilted back, begins to feel the slight strain of the position, and you lower your gaze gradually, letting it fall from the zenith to the horizon, from the stars to the mountains, from the infinite to the merely vast. The mountains to the west are now entirely black, a solid silhouette against the slightly paler sky, their ridgeline a jagged line that cuts across the horizon with the sharpness of a torn edge. The mountains to the east are beginning to show a faint glow, the first hint of the moon that will rise later tonight, a moon that is a few days past full and will climb into the sky around midnight, its light pale and silver and bright enough to cast shadows. You are not waiting for the moon exactly, but you are aware of its eventual arrival in the same way you are aware of tomorrow's work, a future event that will happen in its own time and requires nothing from you now. The desert floor between your camp and the mountains is a vast empty space filled with darkness and sagebrush and the occasional dark shape of a Joshua tree, its twisted arms reaching upward like a frozen gesture. The rail grate, which was visible earlier as a pale stripe across the basin, has now vanished into the general darkness, its precise location known to you only because you helped build it, because your shovel and your back and your hands contributed to its existence, and that knowledge is a kind of seeing that does not require light. You know exactly where the grade runs, where the cut deepens into the hillside, where the fill rises above the wash crossing, and this knowledge is a map in your mind that overlays the dark landscape with the ghost of the work you have done and will continue to do. The stars which seemed so numerous a moment ago are now joined by a few wandering points of light that you recognize as planets, steady and unblinking, their light a slightly warmer tone than the cold silver of the distant suns. One of them, a bright golden dot low in the southwestern sky, is Jupiter, though you have never called it by that name, thinking of it simply as the bright wanderer that appears in different parts of the sky as the seasons turn. Its presence is a familiar one, a reliable marker in the celestial landscape, and you note its position without assigning any significance to it, just as you note the position of the water barrel or the supply wagon. A fixed point in a changing world. Your breathing has slowed over the course of this long stargazing, your body settling deeper into stillness with each passing minute, and the rhythm of your breath has synchronized with something larger. Perhaps the faint pulse of the crickets or the slow blink of a distant star, a harmony that is too subtle to measure, but present nonetheless. The air you inhale is cool and dry, flavored with sage and creosote, and the air you exhale forms a very faint mist that is visible for only a heartbeat before it dissolves. Each breath is a small cycle, an exchange between your body and the desert, and the repetition of this cycle is as steady as the rotation of the sky, as reliable as the appearance of the stars. A quiet rhythm that will continue through the night without any need for your attention or intention. The fire has burned down further while you were looking at the sky, its flames now just a few small tongues of orange dancing above a deep bed of coals, and you bring your gaze back down to its familiar circle of warmth, with a feeling of returning home after a long journey. The embers glow with a steady intensity, their light pulsing very slightly in a rhythm that matches the breeze, and the stones of the fire ring are now fully warmed, their rough surfaces radiating a gentle heat that you can feel on your shins and the tops of your boots. The contrast between the vast cold of the starry sky and the small warm circle of your fire is the essential contrast of this life, the tension between the immense and the intimate, and you occupy the balance point between them with the ease of long practice, at home in both spaces, owned by neither. Your mind, without intending to, without any conscious decision to remember or review, drifts back over the shape of the day, like a hand passing lightly over a rough surface, touching the high points and the low points without lingering on any one of them. This drifting is not a structured recollection, not a story you tell yourself about what happened, but a loose procession of images and sensations that surface from the quiet pool of your memory and then subside again, replaced by others, in a sequence that follows no logic and obeys no chronology. The fire before you, with its soft pop and its steady glow, is the anchor that holds you in the present, while your mind wanders backward through the hours, and the contrast between the stillness of now and the movement of then makes the memories seem like something viewed through water, clear but slightly distorted, close but unreachable. The walk to the cut in the grey dawn comes back to you first, the memory of your boots scuffing through the cool dust, while the sky was still pale and uncertain, the sun not yet risen, but its approach announced by a faint bleaching of the eastern horizon. The air at that hour had a different quality from the air now, sharper and colder, carrying the overnight chill that pooled in the low places and rose up around your ankles as you walked. You remember the feel of your shirt, still cool from the night, against your skin, and the way your shoulders hunched slightly against the temperature, a posture that would loosen as the day warmed and the work heated your blood. The other men walked alongside you in a loose, straggling line, their shapes dark against the pale dirt, their voices low and sparse, and the sound of many boots on gravel made a low, crunching rhythm that was the first music of the day. The cut itself, when you reached it, was a deep notch carved into the flank of a low hill, its walls raw and angular, its floor littered with the debris of the previous day's work. You remember setting down your haversack and your water bottle in the usual spot, a flat rock at the edge of the cut that had become yours by custom, and you remember picking up your shovel from where it leaned against a pile of broken shale, its handle cool and familiar in your hands. The other men did the same, each retrieving his tool from its resting place, and the quiet shuffling of preparation gave way to the more purposeful sounds of work, beginning the clink of iron bars against stone, the scrape of shovels on gravel, the low call of the foreman organizing the gangs for the day's tasks. The foreman's voice, now that you recall it, had a particular quality that made it easy to follow even at a distance, a steady, measured cadence that cut through the noise of the work without sounding harsh or urgent. He called out the assignments in a rhythm that was almost musical, each name followed by a task and a location, and the men moved to their positions with the unhurried efficiency of long practice. You were on the gravel gang again, the same as yesterday and the day before, your job to shovel the loose rock that the blasting crew had left behind into the handcarts that ran along the temporary rails. The foreman's voice had faded from your attention once your task was given, becoming just another element of the background, and now in the quiet of the evening you can barely recall the exact words he said. Only the tone, only the cadence, only the way his voice rose slightly at the end of each instruction and then fell back into silence. The blasting charge, when it came later in the morning, was the single loudest event of the day, a sudden deep whomp that you felt in your chest before you heard it, a pressure wave that travelled through the ground and up through your boots and into your bones. You remember the way everyone paused for a moment, shovels and pickaxes suspended in mid-swing, heads turning toward the source of the sound even though everyone knew exactly what it was and exactly where it came from. The sound rolled across the basin and echoed off the distant mountains, a low thunder that took several seconds to fade, and in its wake came the smaller sounds of rock chips falling, a brief pattering like a hard rain that lasted only a few heartbeats. A cloud of grey dust rose from the blast site, a tall column that climbed into the still air and then slowly leaned eastward as the upper breezes caught it, and you watched that dust for a while before returning to your shovel, your hands resuming their rhythm while the cloud dissipated into a pale haze. That sound, that deep whomp that shook the ground, is gone now entirely, replaced by the soft pop of the sage twig in your fire and the faint rustle of the night breeze in the canvas. The distance between then and now is not measured in hours, but in the complete transformation of the sensory world, from noise to quiet, from motion to stillness, from the company of many men to the solitude of your own small circle of light. The blasting charge is a memory now, a shape stored in your body and your mind, and it has no power to disturb the peace of this evening, because it has already happened and will not happen again until tomorrow, when it will be no more surprising and no more alarming than it was today. The sun climbing the sky comes back to you next, a memory not of a single moment, but of a gradual change that spanned the entire morning. You recall the way the shadow of the cut wall slowly contracted as the sun rose higher, the cool band of shade retreating inch by inch until it was gone entirely and the whole work area lay under the full glare of the desert day. The shovel blade, which had been cool when you first picked it up, grew warmer and warmer under that sun, absorbing the radiant heat until the metal was hot enough to be uncomfortable to touch with bare skin. You remember knocking a handful of dust onto the blade, a trick you learned from an older Navvy months ago, the fine powder sticking to the hot metal and creating a thin, insulating layer that made the shovel handleable again. The dust had sizzled faintly when it hit, a tiny sound lost in the general noise of the work, and then it had settled into a grey film that stayed for the rest of the day. The heat of the afternoon came back to you now as a memory in your skin. The way the sun pressed down on your neck and the backs of your hands. The way sweat formed on your forehead and evaporated almost instantly in the dry air, leaving a faint crust of salt that you could feel when you wiped your brow with your sleeve. The water in your bottle, which had been cool when you filled it from the cask at dawn, grew warm and then hot, and drinking it was more an act of necessity than pleasure, a mechanical replenishment that your body required and you provided without enjoyment. The other men, scattered along the grade with their own shovels and bars, worked through that heat with the same steady endurance, their movements slightly slower than in the morning, but never stopping. A collective persistence that was the engine of the railroad's progress. You remember, in this same drifting way, the particular quality of the light at different times of the day, the way the morning light was pale and slanting and cast long shadows behind every sagebrush and every rock, the way the midday light was flat and white and seemed to eliminate shadows altogether, the way the afternoon light turned golden and rich and made even the dust look beautiful as it hung in the air. These variations in light affected the work in subtle ways, changing the colors of the rock and the soil, altering the visibility of the distant mountains, shifting the whole visual character of the landscape so that the same place looked like three different places over the course of a single day. Now in the darkness lit only by fire, all those variations have merged into a single memory of brightness, a composite image of the day that is bright and hot and active, a stark contrast to the cool, dim stillness of the present. The rail bed, the whole purpose of the work, inched westward across the basin floor as the day progressed, its progress measurable in feet and inches, in the number of handcarts dumped and the number of rails laid. You recall the way the grate slowly extended itself, the raw earth at its leading edge giving way to tamped gravel, and then to the clean parallel lines of iron rails, each rail a long dark bar that weighed hundreds of pounds and required 6 men to lift into place. The spike gang followed behind the rail layers, their hammers ringing out a steady metallic rhythm that was the signature sound of the afternoon, a sound so continuous that it became a kind of silence, a constant background that you stopped hearing even as it continued. Each spike driven was a small permanent act, a piece of steel that would hold the rail in place for decades, and the thought of that permanence, of the many spikes driven by many hands, was a satisfying one that added a quiet pride to the tiredness. The faces of the other men drift through your memory now, not as individuals with names and histories, but as familiar shapes. The particular way each man moved and held his tool and wiped his brow. The pickaxe man with the red bandana tied around his neck, the cart driver who whistled tunelessly between loads, the old Swede who worked with a slow rhythm that never varied and never tired. Each of these figures is a part of the day's texture, a thread in the fabric of the work that you cannot separate from the whole. You do not know all their names, and you have never asked, but you know their habits and their rhythms in the way that a musician knows the other players in an ensemble, a knowledge that is practical and wordless and complete. The end of the day, when it came, arrived not as a sudden stop, but as a gradual winding down, the pace of the work slackening as the sun dropped toward the mountains, the men beginning to glance toward the west to gauge the remaining light. The foreman's whistle, when it finally blew, was a single long note that carried across the basin and echoed faintly, and the sound of it was the sound of release, the signal that the work was done and the rest could begin. You remember laying your shovel down, its blade still warm from the sun, and you remember the walk back to camp, your legs heavy and your shoulders aching, and your mind already drifting toward the fire you would build and the tea you would drink and the long quiet evening that would follow. That walk was the bridge between the two worlds, the world of effort and the world of rest. And now that you have crossed it, now that you sit beside your fire with the stars overhead and the embers glowing, the world of effort seems very far away, a distant shore that you can see but no longer inhabit. These images, these fragments of the day, drift through your mind in no particular sequence, each one surfacing for a moment and then sinking back, like leaves moving on the surface of still water. You do not hold on to any of them. Do not try to arrange them into a narrative or draw any lesson from them. You simply let them come and go, observing them with the same passive attention you have given to the fire and the stars and the cooling earth. The memories are not disturbing or emotional. They are simply the residue of the day, the after-images that linger when the day is done, and they will fade as the night deepens, replaced by the simpler sensations of warmth and stillness and the approach of sleep. The memories of the day have drifted away now, subsiding back into the quiet pool from which they came, and your mind returns fully to the present moment, to the fire and the stars and the cool desert air moving gently against your face. The emptiness that the memories leave behind is not a void, but a spaciousness, a cleared room in your attention that is ready to receive whatever small task presents itself next. And the task that presents itself is the mending of your coat. You have known about this task for weeks, have noticed the torn sleeve every time you put the coat on and every time you took it off, have felt the cool air find its way through the rent on chilly mornings, and yet you have not attended to it until now, because now is the first time that attention has become available, the first time that the necessary combination of quiet and light and stillness has coincided with the impulse to repair. The coat itself rests on a flat stone near the tent opening where you left it this morning. A rough canvas jacket the color of dry earth, its surface stained with the pale ghosts of old sweat and the darker marks of grease from the supply wagon's axles, and the fine grey dust that works its way into every fibre and never quite comes out. You rise from your crate and take the 3 steps needed to reach it, your legs moving with the slow certainty of a body that has been sitting for a long time and needs a moment to remember how to walk. And you pick up the coat with both hands, feeling its familiar weight and the texture of its weave, a coarse plain fabric that was stiff when new but has softened over months of wear into something almost supple. The coat smells of dust and smoke and the faint, sharp tang of old sweat, a smell that is not unpleasant because it is the smell of work honestly done, and you carry it back to your seat beside the fire, draping it across your knees with the torn sleeve uppermost. The tear is a diagonal rent in the left sleeve just below the elbow, a slash perhaps 3 inches long where the canvas caught on a sharp edge of granite weeks ago as you were climbing out of the blasting cut. You remember the moment of catching, the sudden resistance that pulled your arm back and nearly made you stumble. And you remember the sound the fabric made as it gave way, a quick, rough ripping that was loud enough to make the man next to you glance over. The tear has not grown worse since that day, its edges held in place by the tight weave of the surrounding fabric, but it has frayed slightly at the corners where the loose threads have worked back and forth with each wearing. And it is precisely this fraying that you intend to arrest before the entire sleeve unravels. A stitch in time, the old saying goes, and you have the time now, stretched out before you in the quiet hours of the evening. The sewing kit lives in your haversack in a small leather pouch that also holds a spare button made of bone and a short length of waxed linen thread wrapped around a scrap of folded paper. You retrieve this pouch with the same unhurried economy of motion you have used for every other action this evening, your fingers finding it by touch among the other contents of the bag, and you bring it back to your lap, opening the drawstring with a gentle pull that releases the faint scent of leather and wax. Inside the pouch, the sewing supplies are organized with a neatness that speaks of long habit. The needle, a heavy steel tool with a large eye and a sharp point, is stuck through a square of felted wool to keep it from rusting. The thread, a dark brown length that nearly matches the color of the coat, is wrapped around a small card with notches cut in its edges to hold the ends. And the thimble, a simple brass cap with a dimpled surface, sits in the bottom of the pouch where it clinks softly against the spare button when you move the leather. The firelight is not bright enough for needlework unless you position yourself carefully, and so you lean forward on the crate, drawing your knees up slightly and holding the torn sleeve close to the flames where the light is strongest. The fabric in your hands takes on the warm orange glow of the fire, its texture exaggerated by the angled illumination, every thread and every fiber casting a tiny shadow that makes the weave seem deeper and rougher than it is. The torn edges of the rent are now clearly visible, the warp threads lying straight and parallel where they snapped, the weft threads curled and fuzzy where they pulled loose from the weave. You study these edges for a moment with the same calm attention you have given to the fire and the stars, observing the small damage without any impatience or frustration, simply seeing what needs to be done. The needle must be threaded, a task that requires a steadiness of hand that you possess in full measure at this quiet hour. You pull the needle from its felted square, the steel cool and smooth between your fingers, its surface polished by years of use to a soft silver gleam that catches the firelight in a tiny point at the tip. The eye of the needle is a narrow oval, and you hold it up close to your face, positioning it between you and the fire so that the light shines through the opening and makes it easier to see. The thread is the next to be prepared, and you unwind a length of it from the card, measuring it against your forearm with the practiced estimation of many mendings. Enough thread to close the tear with a continuous line of stitches, plus a little extra for the knot. The waxed linen is slightly tacky to the touch, the coating of beeswax having stiffened the fibers and given the thread a faint sweet scent that mingles with the sage smoke in a pleasant combination. Threading the needle is an act of precision that takes your full attention for a few seconds. The thread end moistened with your lips and twisted to a fine point, then guided toward the eye with a slow, deliberate motion that does not hurry and does not falter. The thread finds the eye and passes through, and you draw it out the other side until the two ends are even. Then knot them together with a simple overhand loop that you tighten by pulling gently with your teeth. The knot is small and neat, a tiny lump in the thread that will anchor the first stitch, and you test it with a gentle tug to make sure it will hold before you turn your attention back to the coat. The first stitch is always the most deliberate, the one that sets the pattern for all the rest, and you take your time positioning the needle at the inner corner of the tear where the fabric is strongest. The needle tip presses against the canvas with a slight resistance, the tight weave refusing the point for a moment before yielding with a soft pop that you feel more than hear. A tiny vibration transmitted through the steel to your fingers. You push the needle through until it emerges on the other side of the fabric, then pull it clear with a slow, smooth motion, the thread following behind with a faint whispering sound as it slides through the hole. The stitch is a simple running stitch, the most basic and reliable of all sewing techniques, and you take it across the gap of the tear to the opposite edge, pushing the needle through from the underside and pulling it tight until the two sides of the rent draw together and kiss with a neatness that is deeply satisfying. The firelight flickers across the weave of the fabric as you work, its orange glow shifting and dancing with the movement of the flames, and the shadows cast by your hands move across the canvas in a slow puppet show that you observe without really seeing. The needle continues its path, in and out, each stitch a small identical act that differs from the previous stitch only in its position along the tear. The stitches march across the rent in a steady line, their spacing even and their tension uniform, the result of a skill that was learned long ago and has since become automatic, stored in the muscles of your fingers rather than in any conscious thought. You do not need to count the stitches or measure their spacing. Your hands know what to do, and you let them do it, while your mind drifts in the warm quiet of the firelight. The rhythm of the stitching is a meditation, a slow and steady pattern that occupies your hands and frees your attention to wander or to rest. The needle pushes through, the thread pulls tight, the fabric draws together, and then the needle pushes through again, a cycle that repeats with a constancy that is as soothing as the crackle of the fire or the distant song of the crickets. Each stitch closes the tear by a fraction of an inch, and you watch the rent diminish, with the mild satisfaction of a problem being solved, a small disorder being returned to order, a small damage being repaired. The coat has protected you from sun and wind, and the sharp edges of rocks, and now you are protecting it in return, a reciprocal care that feels right and balanced. The thimble, which you have not needed because the canvas is soft enough to push the needle through with bare fingers alone, remains in the pouch, its brass surface glinting faintly when the firelight catches it. The spare button, carved from a piece of bone and drilled with 4 small holes, sits beside it, waiting for the day when it will be needed. A day that may never come, but for which you are prepared. These small objects, the needle and thread and thimble and button, are a modest kit that represents a form of self-sufficiency, the ability to maintain and repair your own equipment without depending on anyone else. And this self-sufficiency is a quiet point of pride that you do not articulate but feel nonetheless. The tear is now more than half closed, the line of stitches a neat dark seam that stands out against the paler fabric of the sleeve, and you pause for a moment to examine your work, holding the coat up to the firelight and turning it to see the stitches from different angles. The repair is not invisible, the thread is slightly darker than the canvas, and the stitches are visible as small even dashes that mark the former location of the rent. But the repair is strong, the fabric held together with a firmness that will endure, and that strength is the purpose of the work, not beauty or concealment. You are satisfied with what you have done, and you lower the coat back to your lap and resume the stitching, your needle finding its rhythm again without a break in the tempo. The time it takes to finish the mending is not measured. It could be 10 minutes or 30, and the difference does not matter. The fire burns down another fraction of an inch. The stars rotate another fraction of a degree. The night deepens by another increment of darkness, and you stitch. The final few stitches are made at the outer corner of the tear, where the fabric is most frayed and requires extra care, the needle taking smaller bites and the thread pulled with a gentler tension so as not to tear the weakened threads. A final knot, a small loop pulled tight, and then you bite the thread cleanly with your teeth and return the needle to its felted square. The task complete. The coat, now mended, lies across your knees like a sleeping animal, its sleeve restored to wholeness, its serviceability extended by a few more months. You run your thumb over the line of stitches, feeling the slight ridge they make against the surrounding fabric, a texture that will soften with wear and eventually become as familiar as the rest of the coat. The satisfaction of the repair is a quiet one, a small completion in a world of large and ongoing completions, and it settles into your evening like a stone settling into sand without fuss or announcement. You fold the coat once and set it aside on the flat stone, and you place the sewing pouch back into the haversack, and you are still. The fire has burned down now to a bed of glowing coals, the flames that danced and crackled through the earlier hours having consumed the last of the sage twigs and the small branches you fed them, leaving behind only the deep orange heart of the fire, a pulsing mass of embers that breathes warmth into the cooling night. The transformation from active flame to quiet coal happened so gradually that you did not notice the exact moment of transition, only that at some point while you were stitching or watching the stars, the bright yellow light had softened and deepened into this steady, wordless glow that seems to come from inside the stones themselves. The coals shift very slightly as they settle, a tiny rustling sound like dry leaves moving in a gentle current, and each shift sends a brief brightening across the surface of the ember bed, a fleeting intensification of the orange light that fades almost immediately back into the steady pulse. You lean forward on your crate, your hands resting on your knees, and you watch this slow respiration of the fire with the same calm attention you have given to every slow process this evening, the boiling of the kettle, the darkening of the sky, the stitching of the coat, the iron fire rake, a simple bent rod with a wooden handle worn dark by many fires, leans against the stones of the fire ring where you placed it weeks ago and have never moved except to use it. You reach for it now, your fingers closing around the smooth wood that has been shaped by the grip of your hand into a shallow indentation, a custom fit that no other hand would find exactly right. The rake is cool at the handle and warm at the tip where the iron has been resting near the stones, and you lift it with the same slow deliberation you have used for every tool this evening, the shovel and the needle and the kettle, each one an extension of your hand that requires no thought to operate. With the tip of the rake you begin to draw the embers together toward the center of the ring, a gentle scraping motion that nudges the glowing coals into a tighter cluster, a small hill of heat that will retain its warmth longer than a spread-out bed. The coals resist very slightly, their irregular shapes catching on each other and on the rough stone bottom of the ring, and you work the rake with patience, moving first one side of the ember bed and then the other, consolidating the scattered warmth into a single compact mass. As the coals come together, their combined heat intensifies, the orange glow brightening from a dull, sleepy color to a vivid, almost red, that pushes the darkness back by a few more inches, and you feel the increased warmth on your face and hands, a final generous gift from the fire before it settles in for the night. Small sparks lift from the coals as they tumble over each other, brief bright motes that rise a few inches and then vanish, their lives measured in heartbeats, and you watch them with the same mild interest you have given to the stars and the steam and the dancing shadows. When the embers are gathered into a neat mound at the center of the ring, you reverse the rake and use the flat side of the iron tip to gently press down on the pile, compacting the coals so that they nestle closely together, each one sharing its heat with its neighbors in a slow communal exchange of energy that will continue through the night. The surface of the mound is a mosaic of orange and red and dark gray, the individual coals visible as distinct shapes that glow brightest at their edges where the air reaches them, and the whole mass pulses with a rhythm that seems almost organic, a steady in and out of brightness that matches the slow rhythm of your own breathing. The warmth that radiates from this compacted pile is steady and gentle, not the fierce heat of the earlier flames, but a more moderate, more enduring comfort that will last for hours if properly banked. The banking itself is the final task of the evening, the last small act of care you will perform before you surrender to rest. You reach to the side of the fire ring where a small pile of fine grey ash has accumulated from the evening's burning, the soft, feathery residue of the sage and twigs that have been entirely consumed, and you scoop up a handful of this ash with the flat of the rake blade, lifting it carefully so as not to scatter it. The ash is weightless and pale, a ghost of the plants it once was, and it drifts from the rake in a thin curtain as you carry it over the mound of coals, the finest particles lifting into the air and hanging there for a moment before settling. You tip the rake gently, letting the ash fall in a soft grey blanket over the top of the ember pile, covering the brightest coals with a thin insulating layer that will slow the burning and hold the heat in reserve. The transformation is immediate and quiet. The orange glow dims beneath the ash, the brightness muffled into a subdued red-orange that seems to come from a great depth rather than from the surface, and the mound of coals becomes a low, rounded shape, like a small sleeping animal curled in on itself for warmth. You add another handful of ash, spreading it evenly with the flat of the rake, and then another, until the entire mound is covered in a smooth grey coat that shows only the faintest cracks of deeper light where the heat beneath has shifted the ash. The fire is now banked, a stored warmth that will smoulder slowly through the night and be ready to revive in the morning with the addition of dry twigs and a gentle breath. This banking is a small act of faith, a trust that the embers will endure, and you have performed it so many times that it has become a ritual, the final punctuation mark at the end of every evening. You set the rake back against the stones, its iron tip now dusted with ash that will cool and fall away by morning, and you lean back on your crate for what you know will be the last time tonight. The circle of light around your camp has contracted now, the bright dancing sphere of the active fire reduced to a dim glow that barely reaches the toes of your boots, and the darkness beyond has crept closer, its edges pressing in with a gentle insistence that feels less like a threat and more like an invitation. The stars which you saw so clearly earlier seem brighter now by contrast, the absence of competing firelight giving them a sharper brilliance, and the Milky Way has rotated a visible distance across the sky, its cloudy band now angled differently against the zenith. The night has deepened into its middle hours, the time when even the crickets slow their calling and the breeze stills to an absolute calm, and you feel the weight of that hour settling onto your shoulders like a familiar hand. Your body has now reached the stage of tiredness where the boundary between wakefulness and sleep begins to blur, where your thoughts become slow and simple and your movements become even more deliberate than before. The ache in your shoulders has faded to a distant memory, the warmth of the fire having loosened the muscles and the long stillness having given them the rest they needed. Your eyes feel heavy, not with strain but with a gentle gravitation toward closing, a soft desire to let the lids fall and the world disappear for a while. You have been sitting on this crate for hours now, through the sunset and the starlight and the mending and the tea, and the crate has held you comfortably, its wooden slats supporting your weight with the patient reliability of a thing designed for a simple purpose and fulfilling it without complaint. But the time for sitting is coming to an end, and the time for lying down is approaching with the same quiet inevitability that the stars approach their midnight positions. You rise from the crate for the last time this evening, your legs accepting the return of your weight with a slight stiffness that comes from prolonged stillness, and you stand for a moment beside the banked fire, looking down at the faint orange cracks in the ash blanket and listening to the profound quiet of the camp around you. The other tents are dark now, their fires banked or extinguished, and no voices carry on the air, no clink of kettles or scrape of boots. The entire camp has surrendered to rest, its 24 occupants lying in their bedrolls beneath their canvas roofs, their breathing slow and deep, their minds drifting through whatever private landscapes their own memories have prepared for them. You are the last one awake, the final sentinel of the evening, and that role requires nothing of you but to complete your own small rituals and follow where the others have already gone. The tent opening waits for you 2 paces away, its flap tied back with the cotton cord you secured hours ago when the air was still warm from the day. You stoop slightly, your hand finding the familiar grip of the tent pole, and you duck inside the low canvas doorway into the small enclosed space that serves as your shelter. The interior of the tent is dark after the firelight, your eyes taking a moment to adjust to the deeper blackness, and the air inside is still and slightly warmer than the outside air, having trapped some of the day's heat within its canvas walls. The smell of the tent is a composite of old dust and dry sage and the faint residual scent of your own presence, a smell that is not fragrant but is entirely familiar, the olfactory signature of a space you inhabit alone and have come to know, as well as the smell of your own skin. The bedroll lies in the center of the tent on a ground sheet of heavy canvas that protects the woolen blankets from the bare dirt. You knelt this morning when you rose and rolled the blankets into a loose cylinder to air them during the day, and now you unroll them with slow movements, spreading first the ground sheet flat and then the 2 grey wool blankets across it. The blankets are coarse and heavy, their fibers slightly scratchy against your fingers, and they have been patched in several places with stitches that match the stitches you just put in your coat, a continuing history of small repairs that extends the life of things. The wool has a faint smell of lanolin and dust and the countless campfires near which it has been aired, a smell that is as much a part of this life as the sage and the blasting powder and the steam from the kettle. You sit on the bedroll to remove your boots, a task that requires more effort than it did this morning because your body is tired and your fingers are slow. The laces are leather thongs that have stiffened with age and exposure, and you work the knots loose with the patient determination of someone who has done this many times and will do it many more. The first boot comes off with a gentle tug, your foot sliding free with a sensation of liberation, the cool air reaching your ankle and the arch that has been enclosed all day. The second boot follows, and you set both boots side by side near the tent opening, their toes pointing outward in a posture of readiness for the morning. Your socks, thick woolen things with darned heels, you leave on, because the night will be cold before dawn, and any warmth retained is worth retaining. You lie down on the bedroll with the same gradual yielding to gravity that has characterized all your movements this evening, your back settling into the slight dip in the ground that your body has shaped over the weeks of sleeping in this exact spot. The earth beneath the ground sheet is hard but not unyielding, a packed surface of desert soil that has been compressed by your weight into a shallow mold that fits your spine and shoulders and hips with a rough approximation of comfort. The wool blanket you pull up over your body, tucking it around your shoulders and under your chin, and the weight of it is a reassuring pressure, a gentle containment that signals to your body that the day is done and the time for stillness has arrived. Your head rests on a folded cloth that serves as a pillow, its surface cool against your cheek, and you arrange your limbs into the position that you have learned through trial and error is the most restful, legs slightly bent, one arm tucked under the cloth pillow, the other resting across your chest. The canvas of the tent is inches above your face, a pale grey ceiling that you can just make out in the faint starlight that filters through the fabric, and the small sounds of the night are now very close, the rustle of the tent wall, the soft settling of the banked coals outside, the whisper of the breeze, if a breeze happens to stir. You lie still, listening to these small sounds without attending to them, your breathing slowing and deepening as your body recognizes that the long day is truly over. The tension that you did not know you were holding in your jaw and your forehead releases by degrees, the muscles going slack one by one, and your thoughts become fragmented, drifting images that appear and fade without connecting to each other. The last remnants of the day's mental activity dissolving like the smoke from the fire. The last thing you hear before sleep comes, from far out in the dark basin beyond the camp, is the thin wandering call of a coyote. A sound that begins as a low yip and rises into a wavering howl that seems to search the night for an answer. The call hangs in the air for a long moment, its notes bending and stretching, and then it fades, replaced by a silence so complete that it seems to have a texture, a velvet presence that fills the space between the stars. Another coyote answers from even farther away, its voice fainter and more distant, a ghost of a sound that could be mistaken for the wind if you did not know better. And then that too fades, and the silence returns, deeper than before. The millions of stars that you watched with such calm attention continue their slow rotation overhead, their light falling on the canvas of your tent, and on the banked embers of your fire, and on the sleeping camp, and on the long grade of the railroad stretching westward into the dark. And none of it requires anything from you, and you are already gone, slipping into the quiet space where even the stars do not follow.